Let's talk about consumer trust. First of all, I'm with the Center for Food Integrity. We started in 2007, and we have a mission to build trust and confidence in the food system. It's no more complicated than that. Every year, we do research. We started this in 2007, and this year, our national sponsors are Dairy Management, Inc., Rabobank, American Farm Bureau, and the United Soybean Board. We also had some state sponsors, Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee, Indiana Corn, and California Poultry. We have different state supporters every year. Some repeat themselves, but they primarily like the state oversampling. So we will sample in those states more heavily simply to give them a comparison to how do the people in your state feel compared to the national average. We're going to look most specifically at 3 different segments of the population. We picked these segments for a reason. One, moms were 30% of the people that we surveyed. Moms make decisions every single day about what they feed their family. Primarily, they are the grocery shoppers in their family. Millennials, age 19 to 34, and this is the fastest growing segment of the population due to immigration. And foodies. A little bit harder to define, but we're going to get into that. These are people that have food for a hobby. Now, these groups were not mutually exclusive, and less than half of those that we surveyed did not fit in one of these categories. So this is the majority of those individuals that we surveyed. We try to survey about 2,000, some odd folks. We try to get a cross-section of the United States population. That means that we'll only survey so many from the Northeast, so many from the South, and so many male, female, that type of thing, so we can have a true cross-section of the United States. So let's look at millennials first. Their age is 19 to 34 right now. They are not joiners. They're not necessarily associated with any organized religion or politics. They're burdened with debt. They're distrustful of people. They're in no rush to marry, but they're optimistic about the future. Now, I don't know what that says about the state of matrimony here in the United States. They'd rather have death than marriage, but they're still optimistic. The majority have an income or a household income of less than $75,000. Let's look at moms. You know the age of the millennials. Let's look at the moms. They had to have a child in their home under the age of 18. Why? You can be a mom and still have a child you can still be a mom if your kid's older than 18 and doesn't live in the house. But the hard fact is, if your kid's under the age of 18 and they still live in the house, you're making the primary decisions for what they eat. Their income, again, the majority at $75,000 or less. For the household income. And the ages of the moms. This isn't any big shock, except for it's important to note that 37 of these are millennials. So you will see a lot of the information that we show with moms will also be very similar to that of millennials, and this is why. Now, who are foodies? This is a group that's a little bit different to, it's a little bit new. If you had asked me about a foodie when I was a teenager, and keep in mind that was a long time ago, I would have been totally clueless about what you're talking about because I'm not totally sure that they existed at that time. But 21% of the people that we surveyed were foodies. Now, a foodie is best defined as a person that has a refined or ardent interest in food or alcoholic beverage. That doesn't just mean they like beer. That means that they study it. They study wine. They study their food. They eat for a hobby. They study food for a hobby. Food is their hobby. They don't just eat when they're hungry or when it's convenient. The majority, again, or a large portion, actually 46%, are millennials. And the income, the majority at $75,000 for a household income or less. So that'll tell you who we're talking about. Honestly, I would have thought these people would have been older, and I thought they would have been skewed to the higher income levels, but clearly I was wrong. So we're going to talk about their life concerns in general, and then we're going to talk about their views of food. So when we ask them about the most concerning life issues, now it's important for you to know this was an aided question. So we said, here's a list of life issues. You mark the ones you're most concerned about. We gave them a scale of 1 to 10, and we said rank it in the level of, so they were marking the level of concern. So they were not ranking these. So they could have had 4 that were 8s and 10 that were 10s, okay? But it's important to note that when we looked at their top box rating, that would be 8 through 10. These were their top issues. And you'll notice all these are pocketbook related, and all these are pretty much beyond their control. Rising energy cost, keeping healthy food affordable, U.S. economy, rising cost of food, and naturally health care cost. Some additional issues that I think are important to note. Imported food safety coming up in at 63%, as well as just overall food safety at 62%. But let's look at humane treatment of farm animals, down from last year, down 2 percentage points. A lot of these concerns are going to be down, which tells me, if I just had to look at this, that people are feeling more optimistic about the future. Things are looking up. People tend to be far more positive about life when they think the economy is looking up. Women are always more concerned about things than men. And early adopters are more concerned about all issues than late adopters. That's like we've got a firm grip on the obvious. Yes, we know this. Because your early adopters are those that are studying the issues, they feel informed. They are the ones that are driving the decision-making process. They're the ones that you're listening to in your groups. You might actually be that early adopter in your group. But the lowest level of concern this year and every year is that we have enough food to feed the people outside the U.S. It's a little higher this year, but still it continues to be the lowest level of concern because as an American population, we're kind of like, if my plate's full, I'll worry about you later. But for the most part, we talked about how they were less concerned this year than in previous years. U.S. economy about the same, rising cost of food the same, rising health care and rising energy costs down. Less concerned than they were last year. Environmental sustainability and farming, the same. But safety of imported food, food safety, enough to feed the U.S. and humane treatment of animals, all down. So again, people are feeling very optimistic. We're going to look at some comparisons from previous years, and we'll be seeing some trends on some attitudes about food in general, sustainability of farming, that type of thing. And you'll notice that in 2008, lots of things were down. I don't know what people thought was happening in 2008, but they thought the world was going to hell in a handbasket, and it was reflected in their attitude. Right direction, wrong track. This is just an overall general question that we ask to just gauge where we are in general as far as trusting the food system. And 43% said we're on the right track. 30 said wrong track. And 27 are that movable middle, ripe for the picking, and they are just unsure. And that percentage doesn't tend to change very much. Early adopters, 36% believe the food system's on the wrong track. Now, this kind of bothers me because the early adopters are those that are actually leading opinions within their groups. Men, optimistic, 48%. Thought we were going in the right direction. But women, wrong track. Now, let's look at numbers from last year. 34% last year thought we were going in the right direction. So it's up. People are more optimistic about our food system. 38% last year thought we were on the wrong track, so you can see that shift. But very little change in the unsure. So what are the top concerns by the different segments? The three segments of the population that we talked about, the moms, the millennials, and the foodies. When you look at moms, again, 1 through 10 scale. Rising cost of food at the top. You'll notice all these are in the 8s, which 8, 9, and 10 is what we consider a high level of concern. Millennials. Their highest score is 8.18. But again, keeping healthy food affordable. They really only had 4 that were what we considered top box concerns. So again, a reflection of the fact that they're optimistic about the future. Let's look at foodies. This one's pretty interesting to me. Keeping healthy food affordable, please note they start in the 9s, 9.27. These are their top concerns. U.S. economy falls somewhere in the middle of all the concerns, but it's still top box. But look at this. Keeping healthy food affordable is 1 or 2 in all 3 of these groups. But let's just look at the right track, wrong direction. No surprises here, but let's look at this one right here. 49% think we're on the right track. Now this if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. This is their hobby. Okay? They study food all the time. They study food because it's fun to study food. They're not sitting there concerned about food. It's a hobby to them. They're feeling informed. Anytime a person is informed, they're feeling in control, and so therefore they're going to feel like it's going in the right direction. Now, it's important to note before I go much further that this survey surveys attitudes. It does not survey actions. Okay? So this is how they feel about food. Moms, strongly held beliefs. Again, let me explain how we asked this question. We gave them a list of statements, and we said, mark on a scale of 1 to 10 your level of agreement. That means the higher the number, the higher the level of agreement. Okay? But it's an aided question. They were given a list of concerns. I believe the less processed food is, the healthier it is. I prefer to purchase fruits and vegetables that are in season. It's important to me that farmers who produce food receive fair compensation. I like to buy local. And I like to support farmers in my community. So they have a high regard for farmers. They want them to be treated fairly. They also want fresh and local and less processed. Now keep in mind, again, this is attitudes. This is not actions. Okay? Millennials. Less processed. It's healthier. It's important to me that farmers who produce food receive fair compensation. Prefer to purchase fruits and vegetables in season, but look at this one. Organically produced food is grown using fewer chemicals, and animals are treated better on free-range farms than animals on farms where they are confined. This is very important right here. This is the only time in any of these groups that this shows up. So it's millennials, and let me remind you, this is the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population. Foodies. They feel strong about these beliefs. Keep in mind, they're all related to food. This is their hobby. So they are passionate about this. Again, less processed is healthier. They want farmers to receive fair compensation. They want to support farmers in their communities. So farmers are held in high regard. Organically produced food is better. And they want to buy local. So again, fresh, local, in season. And they want to support the farmers. So where are they going for information? You know, we talk about the foodies being informed, and so where are they going for their information? For the first time since 2007, the web or websites tops the list. Primarily, it has been, in years past, local television stations. Local television stations fell dramatically this year. Okay? Last year, websites was 22%. So it fell, but it still tops the list. Local television was 23% last year. This year it is 16%. So they are not going to local television. You'll notice Google is last. That's a search engine. We listed that simply because that is sort of the vehicle that they get to different websites, but important to note because this shows up on a pretty regular basis. I laugh at the Google thing because we're seeing that more and more. You'll see it's like number 3 when we go through these segments. When I was a child and I'm approaching 50, I can tell you that if I asked my dad a question and he didn't know the answer, he'd say, well, let's go check the encyclopedia. Now, I see some nods out there, so you all know what an encyclopedia is. It's a bound volume, normally a set of 26 or 7 if you got the yearbook. And now if my kid asks me a question, and he's not a millennial, I had him right before I joined AARP, if I hesitate more than 2 or 3 seconds, he'll say, never mind, Mom, I'll Google it. So, you know, it's just a totally different mindset, and you will see that as we go through this. Top sources for moms, websites. Family, not online. Google, local television stations, and friends, not online. That family and friends we're going to talk about a little bit more because that is what we call the tribal mindset. Millennials, websites. Friends, not online. Google is third again. Family, not online. And friends, online. Foodies. Websites, 25%. Friends, not online. Google, again, third. Family, not online. Food-specific TV programs or networks. You'll notice this is their hobby. This is the only time this showed up. So let's get specifically into 2014. And what we looked at in more in-depth this year was the messenger and the message. So you all are familiar with this trust model, and I think when we began to research and survey the population in 2007, we came back with the results, and we used a company here in Iowa, Gestalt, and they are professionals in the surveying business. And when we found out that confidence, values similarity, a person like you, carried more weight than competence, how much you know, we thought those findings were wrong. And so we went back to them and we said, you might want to check this again. We're pretty certain this is wrong. And they came back to us and they said, no, we're pretty certain it's not. And we're the professionals, look at this again. And in fact, that is true. Now, if you think about it, it makes sense. However, for a long time, the industry, me included, liked to use science. It was what we knew. It's what we based our business decisions on. So that's what we like to talk about. But it didn't make our case very strong. So what we found out was that shared values, or confidence, was 3 to 5 times more important than how much you knew, how smart you were. Now, that's very important. That gets you in the door. But once you get in the door, you actually need to communicate some scientific information, because you know, as well as I do, that pork production today is based on science. I mean, we know a lot more about pork production today than we did 10 years ago, and we will know even more 10 years from now. So there is a lot of science to our industry. Some of that needs to be communicated so that they can use it to make informed decisions, and yet it's very difficult if that's what we lead with. We can't lead with that. We have to lead with the confidence, or I share your values. So we've got to figure out how to break down those communication barriers, because science is important. And how do we do that? Well, we've got to understand how to introduce science and technical information into our conversation. And we also have to understand their communication channels and how they process information, the consumer population in general, but we looked specifically at these 3 groups, how they make informed decisions, how they form their beliefs. Cultural cognition. I know everybody talks about cultural cognition, don't you? I don't. There's a professor at Yale, though, Dan Kahn, that does study it, and he talks about the tendency for people to conform their beliefs about a controversial matter to the group values that define their culture. Now, what does this mean? I'm going to simplify it for you. So let's assume that I am at a football game. We're going to make this an Iowa State football game, because I'm going to assume the majority of you are Iowa State fans. This is yes, this is no. Nod for me. Okay. I'm short, and so let's say it's a very tight game, and we've got a controversial play, and everybody stands up. Now, I wasn't paying attention to the play, because chances are I was talking. Now everybody stands up. I can't see a thing. If the fans beside me, who are also Iowa State fans, begin to boo, then I just make the assumption that because your values are like mine and we love the same team, I too should be booing. Okay? Even though I haven't seen this play. I know very little about football even, but I'm going to take my cues from you. That's the easiest way I know to define cultural cognition. Now, when I flash these 2 pictures up, you love one and you hate the other, and I don't care who you are. And you don't need to tell me. But what we do as human beings is we seek out information that confirms that the way we believe is actually, in fact, the truth. So you are looking at one of these 2 on television, but you're probably not looking at both, okay? Because we go to those sources that confirm that our beliefs are accurate. Now, this is important because you'll remember when we said, where do we go for information? This is the old style communication. We had an expert. He communicated everything. We all said, yes, that's absolutely right, because you're the expert. But times have changed. So now, instead of communicating to the masses, we have masses of communicators. And you know for a fact that you don't have to know what you're talking about to have a strong opinion. So when you look at these, when we talk about the sources of information, we talked about that. We talked about Google and websites. Look at these different sources. Online friends, family, friend, blog. This is where they're going for their information. Very different than it used to be. Now, I'm putting this next slide in here because I want you to just know that this mindset is out there. I know you can listen to me and you think, yeah, there's some truth to what you're saying, but I was moderating a panel, a mom's panel, in April, and it was in Orlando, and we had actually screened this panel. They had to have children 18 years or younger living in their home, and they had to be the primary grocery shopper, but they also had to have concerns about GM foods. That's how we had screened this panel. I had to remain objective, so I kept a very straight face when I asked this question. And I said, what information sources had you used to come to your conclusion that GMOs are dangerous? And this woman, who seemed relatively intelligent, said, I'm a part of a mom's group. When there is some big consensus, I think there's something here. You don't need doctors or scientists confirming it when you have hundreds of moms. So, this goes back to the friends and family. This is where they're looking for their information. And it also goes back to the cultural cognition. These moms are like me. They love their kids. We live in a similar community. Well, if they think this, I surely must think this. There must be something to it. We also know that bad news has bias. You got one piece of bad news, you're going to need 5 similar pieces of good news just to neutralize it. Not counter it, just neutralize it. Okay? So, 1 to 5. Nothing there you don't know. Big is bad. We know this too. Shared values. If I know everybody in my group and they share my values, then yes, I can trust them because their motives are the same as my motives. But big is bad because you only got big because you are bad, and therefore I can't really trust you. So there's an inverse relationship between size and shared values. If you're bigger, you must be bad, and I can't trust you. And you also need to know millennials are the least trusting of all these groups. And again, important to note, they are equal opportunity mistrusters. They don't trust anybody, but they're the fastest growing segment of our population. Decision-making maze. Now, we all make decisions about things that we're not familiar with. I grew up on a farm. I was a farmer. I have worked in the industry all my professional life around food and food production. It is not difficult for me when I go to the grocery store to make decisions about what I feed my family. It's not complicated, and I don't understand how it can be complicated until I sit back and think about those particular issues that I face on a daily basis that I am not as familiar with. So let's just think about that mom that didn't grow up on a farm and all the things that she's facing. That was backwards. I want to go forwards. There you go. She's got a history of contradictions. She reads this on one website and this on another. But she's hanging around a mom's group that says GMOs aren't really safe, so you need to be very, very careful. And big is bad, and that did not come from a local farmer, and so you do not know where that food came from. It must have come from somewhere corporate, and she doesn't really understand all the science, although she tries really hard. So she's sincere about trying to learn, but she's getting conflicting information. Yes, I know it's frustrating. We're going to talk about how to unwrap this in a little bit. So we're going to talk specifically about the 2014 research. Now, I'm going to, it's deep, and so I don't fully understand it. I'm going to explain to you the parts that I do understand. And I think it's the parts that will actually apply to your everyday decision making. When we looked at this, we quickly realized that we had to test not only trust levels, but who's the most effective messenger? And what's the most effective message? And how do you structure that and combine those two to make them effective? Because after you've developed confidence, after you've developed that you're a person like me, we have value similarity, you actually have to have some content after you get in that door to share with them. And so here's what we tested. We tested 11 different messengers. Okay? And I'll show you the results of those 11 different messengers, but right now we're going to talk about 3 that we studied more in depth, and that was a mom scientist, a federal government scientist, and a peer that shared my interest. A friend, a family member. And we measured messenger trust prior to sharing the message. So we said, if here's the topic, who do you trust? If here's the topic, who do you trust? And then we played a scenario and offered some insight, changed the voices of the messaging a little bit based on the messenger, and we'll go through that. Now, what we also had to do was we had to provide some outrage factors, controversial issues. We used antibiotic resistance and GM foods. Those are both hot topics right now. Now, it's very important for you to remember that when we studied this, we used these two topics as outrage factors. We were not testing ideal messaging as it relates to these two topics, okay? So we're talking about messenger trust and message creation. You also see pictures down here. Now, if you're like most of my audiences, you're looking at that government scientist and said, it's no wonder people don't trust him. I wouldn't trust him either. He looks shady. The people being surveyed did not see the pictures. They only saw copy. It was also done online, and if there was an animal welfare video that was released or there was a food recall, we pulled that survey, so there was no impact from those pieces of news. So what promotes messenger trust? Trust in a messenger. This is not new. You're not going to be surprised. Competence and confidence were both strong again. In other words, a smart person like me. But confidence, again, stronger. A person like me. So that's still holding true. But let's go a little deeper. Promoting the elements of believability in a message. Now, we have accurate presentation of risk, openness and transparency, and a unifying message. In other words, that compelling, deeper message that touches that human behavior. How many are old enough in here to remember the 1993 recall, Jack in the Box, E. coli? I definitely am. Well, for those of you that are young, stay with me. I'll try to outline this. But there was an E. coli outbreak in some beef. 5 children died. Many others were ill. Okay? This was Jack in the Box. Now, let's make the assumption that you are a person, you have a small child, age 5, and you eat at Jack in the Box quite often, but you hear about this, so you stop eating there. You also have a neighbor that works at Jack in the Box, and you're talking to him outside across the fence, and you share with him your concerns. Now, if he says to you, I wouldn't worry about that. I know it was only 5 children, but do you have any idea how many burgers we sell every single day? It's a pretty small percentage. I wouldn't worry about it. Or you can feel confident. You can't wait to get back in that drive-thru, can you? No, you're not going to do that. You're not going to risk your kid's life based on that message. But if he takes this approach, I understand your concern. Listen, as a parent, I'd be concerned too. We did everything we possibly could, but we are taking additional precautionary risk. I mean, I could tell you about those. But yeah, I understand why you're concerned. And I'll tell you right now, I don't know that I would want to risk going back to Jack in the Box, and I work there. But I can tell you this, we're committed to the health and safety of our food and our customers, and please know that we are sorely regretful, and we are looking at every single process that we have. But yeah, I get your concern. Now, you may not be ready to go back the next month, but pretty soon you're going to feel confident that, one, they're concerned. It's that driver, human behavior. He loves his kids as much as I love mine. Open and transparent. An accurate presentation of risk. Yes, I understand there were risks, and there's certain things that we're going to continue to do better. And there was more information, I'm sure, that they could share. But that is the far better message. So let's look at moms and who moms trusted when we talk about antibiotic resistance. We gave them 3 scenarios. In 2 of the 3, they trusted a mom scientist. In the other one, they trusted the government scientist. So antibiotic resistance to them is both a science issue and it's a parent, I am concerned what it's doing to my kid issue. When they looked at GM foods, 2 scenarios, mom scientist first in both. Peer was last in both. In other words, I like you, but no, I don't think you know much about GM foods. And keep in mind, when we did these scenarios, we altered the voice to match the messenger. So if it's a mom scientist, she's going to talk a little bit about science, but she's also going to talk about being a mom. And I understand your concerns. Millennials. Mom scientist was chosen 2 out of 3 times for antibiotic resistance. Government scientist and the other one. And keep in mind, this is the most distrusting group. When it came to GM food, 2 scenarios, mom scientist in one, government scientist in the other. That tells me they're viewing this as a scientific topic. They're not looking to their peers, and these are the folks that love peers. Foodies. Mom scientist in 2 out of 3, government scientist in the other one. No shock there, but look at this one. When it comes to GM food, government scientist in both. So for a foodie, the GM topic is a scientific issue, and that's where they're going for their information. Okay? Now, important to note, the mom scientist was second in one, but the peer was second in the other, another foodie. Food's his hobby, food's my hobby. I bet he's informed. But we don't all have a mom scientist in our back pocket to carry our message. So let's look at some other sources of information that they trusted and the levels of trust. When we're talking about antibiotic resistance, they trust a family doctor, but they don't trust him a whole lot because on a scale of 1 to 10, we just have a 7.22. Important to note, Dr. Oz at the bottom, 5.12. Just don't trust Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz is the bane of a lot of our existences, and I totally understand that, and everybody always wants to counter Dr. Oz. But it's important to note that sometimes you don't need to counter Dr. Oz because they already don't trust him. Don't break into jail and make a bigger deal out of this than is necessary. So when we look at GM foods, a government scientist, scientist who's a mom. Dr. Oz, next to last. He's at 5. But we just looked at moms and GM foods because that seems to be the hot topic these days. A farmer is number 2. That's important. They're going to trust you with information. Dr. Oz, next to last, 5.52 again. We worry about Dr. Oz, but it appears we don't need to. Millennials, farmers number 2 again. Dr. Oz, last. Foodies, farmer is 3rd, but look, when we're talking about GM foods, we got the scientist that's a mom, the university scientist. So it's a science issue for a foodie. Farmer is 3rd. That's good news for us. Dr. Oz, last again. But they at least give Dr. Oz a 6.77 this time. Foodies mark everything higher because this is their passion. I'm going to go into some attitudinal surveys because we get this question every year. If we've been surveying since 2007, how are things trending? I may go through these pretty quickly because I am quickly running out of time. So if you have questions about these, please stop me because, yeah. Uh-huh. It's difficult because lots of times people are in a university setting because it kind of is like Switzerland. You know what I mean? They can just go in and do their research and they don't have to take a position. I don't have magic answers for you, Angela, but I would say to create a forum that is safe. And sometimes that is online. You know, as they go to websites, and again, they will be very cautious there because it's in writing and, accessible. But I wouldn't give up on it. A lot of them are getting braver than they used to be, especially if they're a specialist in their area, because now they are getting the exposure that maybe they didn't before. So that really doesn't really answer your question, but that's all I know to share with you because I do realize it is very difficult to get them to step forward. Actually, my experience would tell me, and this is just anecdotally, we don't have any numbers, but I would say your older professors have, they have seen issues come and go, and they are very confident in themselves, and so they will step forward and say, listen, I understand you're concerned, but here's really how it works. I would also say older professors tend to know how to communicate better. Not everyone, but they have enough experience that they know how to communicate with different audiences, and they're not purists. So they understand there's real life out there and that their research has to reflect that. All right, let's look at farm animals. Again, levels of agreement. 1 to 10, we gave them a statement. They had to rate their level of agreement. If farm animals are treated decently and humanely, I have no problems consuming milk, meat, and eggs. Good news for us, 50% said, yeah, I'm good with that. Okay? And that continues to hold true since about 2007. Not a lot of change there. 2009, they thought the world was falling apart. U.S. meat is derived from humanely treated animals. This one bothers me because people don't really believe this either. You know, if you treat them humanely, I'd eat it. But I don't really believe that you do. I mean, you'll notice mean from last year, mean from this year, in the 5s. And it goes up and down, but it doesn't change a great deal. Started in the 5s, still in the 5s. I would support a law in my state to ensure the humane treatment of farm animals. Oh, yeah. Everybody's about a law in their state. And this has actually gone up since 2007. Sustainability, we have other questions, but I just threw this one in here because I thought it would be interesting. I am more concerned about global warming than I was a year ago. No, not really. I'm about the same level of concern, and it's not high. It's trended upward a little bit, but it goes up and down, so I don't think there's any significant change there. We talk about feeding the world. This is always a topic that we think will be a selling point, and I can assure you it's not. We are operating on the assumption that people are compassionate. They tend not to be. So the U.S. has a responsibility to provide food for the rest of the world. No, not really. In the 4s. And that has gone up slightly. It is important for the U.S. to teach developing nations how to feed themselves. Yeah, we're all about teaching you if you want to support yourself. And that continues to go up and down, not much. That's really not a great deal of variance. Bias against size and scale. Now, it's important that you know when we surveyed these individuals, we did not say this is a large farm, this is a small farm, this is a large food company, this is a small food company. Large and small were relative in their head, so that's important to know. Family farms are likely to put their interest ahead of my interest. We also did not define family farm. We just used this term. No way. A family farm would not put their interest ahead of mine. In the 5s, low level of agreement. Hanging right in there over the past 3 years. Commercial farms are likely to put their interest ahead of my interest. Absolutely, 50% believe they would. Mean score about the same as it was last year. A little more agreement since 2012, but it's not looking good for us. Small farms are likely to put their interest ahead of mine. No way, they would never do that. I have a high level of trust in a small farm. About the same. Large farm, likely to put their interest ahead of mine. Absolutely, they most certainly would. A large farm would put their interest ahead of mine. And that is hanging about the same. Small food company would put their interest ahead of mine. No, I don't believe they would. About the same as last year. A large food company. Absolutely, a large food company would put their interest ahead of my interest, but again, this goes back to the big is bad. About the same. Local food company are likely to put their interest ahead of my interest. No, probably not. About the same. National food company. So again, big. Absolutely. A national food company would put their interest ahead of my interest all the time. And you'll see that mean didn't change much from last year either. Concern and confidence. I have access to all the information I want about where my food comes from, how it is produced, and its safety. No, not really. I mean, I get information, but I don't have as much as I want. Now, when you ask them what type of information do you want, well, they don't really know, but they really don't have access to it. Up and down, but that continues to climb. Yes? No, it is a cross-section of the United States. And we ask them about region and income and ethnicity, gender, so that we can truly get a cross-section. So, in other words, it's done online. So if you say, I am from the Midwest and I am, well, first of all, if you're from a farm, we kick you out. But assuming that we have already gotten enough males from the Midwest to reflect the U.S. population, we would say, thank you, but you're of no value to us. No, we wouldn't say that, but we would not survey. Okay? Because we want a true cross-section of the U.S. Good question. We asked them 2 sets of foodie questions. Are you a foodie? So this is what you say. Then we gave them a series of questions, and then we derived if they were a foodie. The foodie information I gave you was from the derived set. In other words, a lot of people like to think of themselves as foodies, but to truly meet that definition, we had them answer a series of questions. Like if you were to ask a person, are you an early adopter? Well, by God, yes, I'm an early adopter. Everybody's hanging on my opinion. When in fact, when you ask them a series of questions, they are not. Okay? Did that answer your question, Brad? Okay. I am more concerned about healthy eating than I was a year ago. Oh, yes, I am. And everybody likes to think that they are, you know. And it's holding about the same. I feel confident about the food choices I make for my family. Everybody wants to feel confident about the food choices. Oh, yes, I'm feeling confident. Because what this says is I am making sound decisions. Now, do they really feel that way? Hard to say, but they certainly want you to think that. About the same as last year. I'm concerned about the affordability of healthy food. We saw that this was the case, and these numbers reflect that again. In the 7s. About the same as last year. I am more concerned about the affordability of healthy food than I was a year ago. Clearly, I'm marking the one that's going back. No. Healthy food than a year ago. Okay. Yes, they are, but there's very little change here. I trust today's food system. This is our last trend. No, not really. Sort of. I don't totally distrust it because I only have 17% that gave it a low box rating, but I only have 28% that gave it a high box rating. So I'm only marginally trustful. So what do we do with this? This is great information, but what do you do? At the end of the day, you got to do something. You know, it's not enough just to know it. And you need to make believability a key driver in creating your information. So you got to show them all the risk. You got to show them that you're a human being and that you truly are concerned and that you want to be transparent. Identify the groups that you want to engage with. If you want to engage with foodies, then you need to look at the foodie information and you want to say, here's where I'm going because here's where they are. So meet them where they are. If they're online, you be online. If they're going to websites, go to websites. But you need to know about your audience. And you need to develop values-based engagement strategy. I'm a mom, you're a mom. We're the same. I love my kids, you love your kids. None of that is new to you. And you need to embrace skepticism. How many have ever talked to somebody that's not in the food production arena and they say something and you look at them like, yeah, you a sharp one. You want to do that. It's hard not to. Because you know some of the stuff they're spouting is not accurate, but you have to embrace the fact that they don't have the experiences you have. And so you have to embrace their skepticism and say, yes, I can understand how you might have concerns about that. And you have to commit to engaging over time. I liken this to the very first time I met my husband. I thought he was a jerk. I did not like him. And luckily for him, he did not give up. Actually, luckily for me, he did not give up. And we continued to get to know one another. And that is exactly how I would liken this relationship. You don't move into a neighborhood and know your neighbors immediately and they immediately trust you. You have to get to know one another before you can actually become a credible source to them. And that's what you have to do online or in person with whichever group you choose to engage with. There's going to be webinars that dig a little more in depth. This afternoon we've got one on the insight into moms, insight into foodies on February 12th, insight into antibiotic resistance, and finally insight into food and GM ingredients. These are all 1 to 2 Central Time should be on Thursdays. And you can register online free of charge. They are just available to you. The cost of these webinars is covered by the sponsorships of the survey. Also, there are printed out copies of this summary of the survey findings you can take with you, take as many as you want, as long as they're there. And there's also, that book is available on our website, 24 pages, downloadable.